A Conor conspiracy? I'm not so sure. Welcome into Overtime with Matt Moscona. I am your host, Matt Moscona. One of the more disappointing results in MMA history happened on Saturday when Conor McGregor, after his 5-year hiatus, the most famous and marketable star the sport of MMA has ever seen, returned to face Max Holloway in a rematch 13 years in the making. And Conor McGregor didn't make it but 1 minute and 9 seconds into round one. As a matter of fact, he really didn't make it past about 5 seconds, because if you watch the fight, and I don't have the permissions to show you the clip, so I won't do it here, but if you can find it. If you watch the fight, Conor, and I was watching the fight live, Conor McGregor, right at the opening bell, goes for a left roundhouse kick, meaning he was planting on his right foot, and his right knee buckled. And after that, every time he tried to attack, his right knee continued buckling. He fell. He was hurt. The fight stopped 1 minute and 9 seconds into round one. And it was massively disappointing. And as a result of this, it has led many people to suggest that maybe Conor was injured before the fight. And so you're seeing a lot of the conspiracy theories. People are Zapruder film dissecting some of the locker room warm-up kicks that Conor was throwing. And then there's one moment during the walkout where Conor McGregor is with the cut man outside of the Octagon. If you're not a fan of MMA, if you're a fan of MMA, you know this, but if you're not, that's okay. When the fighter, before they enter the Octagon, the cut man will put Vaseline on their face. They'll check for a cup check, the mouthpiece. They'll check their gloves before they're allowed into the Octagon. Well, Conor is coming out of the locker room. He's wearing shoes. Well, he goes to kick his shoes off, the move all of us have done, right? Where you take like the toe of your shoe and you put it on the heel of the other to pull your foot out. Well, he does that. He kind of hops. So people are like, oh, see, he lost his balance. I'm not so much of a believer in that conspiracy theory. I think Conor blew out his knee when he was throwing that kick, and that's what happens sometimes because ring rust is real. Let me be very clear before I go any further, okay? I did not pick Conor McGregor to win the fight. I do not believe Conor McGregor would have won the fight had he not been injured. I think Max Holloway would have taken him apart. Fights like this with famous fighters tend to expose casuals. And by the way, that's not a knock. I don't mean that as an insult. I love MMA and I welcome anyone to the sport, but I know this because I was one in 2007. I'll tell you my moment when I had to sort of come to grips with the reality of this sport. In 2007, Chuck Liddell and Rampage Jackson fought at UFC 71. And this was a major transcendent fight because Liddell and Rampage had become stars, not only in the sport, but they had crossed over. Rampage was doing movies and there was a level of fame. And it so brought a lot of people to the UFC back 19 years ago now. And the sport has reached incredible heights since. But at the time, this was a massive fight. And that fight ended just 1 minute and 53 seconds into round one. And if you go watch the fight, the blow that Rampage clipped Chuck Liddell on his chin and slept him, you would look at that and say, how in the world did a guy go to sleep on that? It was a glancing blow on his chin. Well, when you watch the sport, you realize as guys get older, they lose their chin. And with 4-ounce gloves, yes, what looks like a glancing blow to you and me, you hit someone on the right spot, you hit that button, and it's night-night. And MMA is different than boxing because you can finish a fight. They will call a fight. There's no standing 10 count. You can finish a fight. So, and I learned that back then. Now, I grew to fall in love with the sport, watching George St. Pierre and Anderson Silva, and then John Jones, despite all of his flaws as a human being, is the most incredible mixed martial artist we've ever seen. So I've lived through that. And quite honestly, a lot of us are getting that lesson as well with the World Cup in the United States, because so many casuals, of which I would say I am one, you're watching soccer and wondering about strategy and different things like that, and not really knowing what we're watching. But Conor, someone like Conor, a personality, a figure like that, brings more people to the sport, which is amazing. And I'm very, very much for it. But the reality is, ring rust is a real thing. You can't sit out of this sport for 5 years and then think you're going to step back in and be in your prime. And by the way, the last time we saw Conor in the UFC, he had lost 3 of 4. He was dismantled by Khabib and then lost back-to-back fights to Poirier. And the last time he fought Poirier, he mangled his left leg. So Conor, 5 years ago, was clearly on the backside of his career. Then he comes back 5 years after a devastating leg injury, albeit to his left leg. This was his right leg on Saturday night. anyone that assumed he was going to be able to step into peak prime Conor form against Max Holloway, who's one of the greatest fighters of all time and is as among the winningest fighters in UFC history, who has consistently fought over that time period. That's what Conor was a major underdog in the fight and was not going to win it. And I, for one, by the way, hope he does not come back. It's Anderson Silva did this near the end of his career, the most dominant winner we had ever seen in UFC history, aside from John Jones. Silva just couldn't give it up. And so he kept fighting and kept losing to lesser fighters, which in the minds of some might have lessened his legacy and his win-loss record. But Conor is done. He is done. He can no longer compete at the highest level. And what's amazing about the evolution of this sport and what the UFC has done is more extremely gifted athletes are fighting and becoming multidisciplined earlier in their lives and their careers. And so the floor in the UFC just keeps getting higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. So someone like Conor, who isn't the best all-around fighter, was an elite level striker in his prime, but not the best all-around fighter, if he were just coming into the sport today, probably wouldn't hang. The same like I just mentioned guys like Chuck Liddell and Rampage Jackson, they couldn't get a cup of coffee in the UFC today. So that's part of the evolution of the sport. But specifically, as some have sort of opined that there's this conspiracy theory that Conor was already injured. That is absurd. For what it's worth, Conor did tweet Saturday night, I guess early hours Sunday morning, after the fight. He tweeted, "My head gasket is gone, destroyed. I had no injury or injuries going into the fight. I was throwing kicks, planted, and jumping all through camp, as well as backstage before the fight. This came out of nowhere. I am beyond dark here. I can only describe it as hell." He tweeted again, "I was so sharp and ready for this fight. I cannot believe what has happened. The talk of me being off while walking into this fight is nonsense. I was calm, ready, and confident. I am in shock. What has taken place? The devil is literally staring me right in front of my face here. I am not engaging. I will be at church tomorrow. I will overcome this. I will not be deterred. I will return." So Conor addressing it head on there, the conspiracies that he was already injured, saying he was not. And by the way, the medicals are so extensive in the UFC that there is quite literally no way that injury would go undiagnosed, and no way that if it were diagnosed, they would allow him to fight in the UFC in a fight like that, because it's dangerous. I mean, these are two skillfully trained killers. And if someone's in there on one leg, knowingly, they would never let them in. I'll remind you, one of the biggest fights that never was back in 2016. It was UFC 200. It was Daniel Jones against John Cormier. It was going to be a unification bout. And Daniel Cormier is he's a Hall of Famer, from Louisiana, one of the all-time greats. He was an Olympian, 2-division champion. The only mountain he never scaled was beating John Jones. And he was going to get his rematch in July of 2016 at UFC 200. And a couple of days before the fight, John Jones gets popped for PEDs. And I'll never forget the video of them telling Cormier, sort of in the locker room, he's sitting there in a chair, arms folding, starts kicking his legs in the ground because he knew that was his shot. And you don't get these shots all the time. But they're not going to compromise the integrity of the fight game of the sport that is commissioned. And just like John Jones was not allowed to fight in what was the main event a couple of days before the main event of the biggest fight card of the year, which is always Super Fight Weekend around July 4th. Like, they were not, which was this weekend with the Conor fight, Conor and Max. They were not going to let Conor fight, no matter the hype, if they knew he was in there with a busted knee before the fight even started. The reality is, this is a sport that creates a lot of disappointing results. Tons of hype with a lot of disappointing results. And I can go through so many of them. I mean, one that comes to mind was UFC 141 when Brock Lesnar made his return against Alistair Overeem. And he had diverticulitis. I mean, Brock Lesnar had been sliced in the gut from that illness. And as you'll learn, you get cut like that in your abdomen. A lot of times those muscles never grow back. And Alistair Overeem's a huge man who we later learned, was abusing PEDs. But Alistair Overeem kicked Lesnar right in the gut, and Lesnar just crumbled, and the fight was over. And it was so disappointing to see, but it happens. And it's not unique to MMA. I mean, remember Mayweather-Pacquiao, the fight that we were robbed of in those fighters' primes because they could never come to an agreement. They fight as 40-year-olds, and it was a total snooze fest. It happens, and it's not just in combat sports. Think about in football. Look, I love football. I'm an LSU guy. One of the most disappointing results in the history of college football was January 9th, 2012, LSU, Alabama. The game in the regular season was deemed the game of the century. They played an overtime 9-6 game with suffocating defenses and NFL talent all over the field. And the rematch happened in the national championship game, and LSU didn't cross midfield until the fourth quarter and lost 21-0. It was an absolute dud. One of the most disappointing moments, the most disappointing moment in LSU athletics history. And for everyone who loves college football that came to that, was disappointed by the result. Think about Super Bowls. You know, the average margin of victory in a Super Bowl is 14.3 points. For all we spend 2 weeks building up a Super Bowl, the average margin in a Super Bowl is 2 touchdowns. We seldom get great Super Bowl games. More often than not, what we get is the Seahawks and the Broncos in 2014, the 43-8 game. The Niners and the Broncos back in 1990, Super Bowl 24, the 55-10 result. Remember 2001, those 2000 Ravens that were so great in January of 2001. They play, the Giants. 34-7 was that result. The Bears, the 85 Bears beat the Pats 46-10. Man, just a few years ago in the 2018 season, Super Bowl 53, the Patriots beat the Rams 13-3, a total snooze fest of a football game. Like, sometimes it just doesn't live up to the hype. And unfortunately, in this situation in MMA, that happened with Conor McGregor. Now, look, sometimes we see fast finishes and they're awesome. And MMA provides that as well. Listen, I was present for the quickest knockout in the history of the UFC when George Masvidal hit his flying knee on Ben Askren in Vegas back in 2019 and knocked him out in 5 seconds. There was so much chatter before that fight. If you remember, Masvidal just sprinted across the octagon, flying knee right to Askren's forehead, and knocked him out. I was in T-Mobile Arena in Vegas to watch it. It was incredible. 5 seconds. But like, you got your money's worth because those 5 seconds were one of the most incredible things that we had ever seen. Conor, when he knocked out Jose Aldo, was one of the more incredible knockouts that you'd ever seen early in a fight. So it happens. In MMA, you do have quick finishes, and sometimes they're show-stopping and amazing, like Askren, like Masvidal knocking out Askren. And sometimes it's just a total disappointment, like what we saw with Conor McGregor and Max Holloway on Saturday night. But the bottom line is Conor McGregor's 37 years old. He hadn't fought in 5 years. The last time he had fought, he was a shell of what he was. The sport has evolved immensely since then, largely on the back of superstars like John Jones and Anderson Silva and Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor, who continue to elevate and expose the sport to so many more people. So later in their career, they become a victim of their own success because so many more young, talented people are coming behind them, wanting to be them and beat them. Conor McGregor shouldn't fight again. He was not hurt before that fight on Saturday. He's a 37-year-old dude who hadn't fought in 5 years and tried to get in there with Max Holloway, and his knee blew out. I don't like. I love Drew Brees, Saints guy. Drew Brees retired and said recently on an interview, he's like, everything feels right. My body feels good. My brain, I can still process everything. I feel like I can play, but his shoulder is gone. Like he says, when he plays with his kids, he has to throw left-handed because he's got a bum shoulder. Imagine if Drew Brees tried to come back to the NFL and play left-handed. That's kind of what Conor McGregor was doing on Saturday against Max Holloway. My hope is we can appreciate Conor's legacy for what it is, one of the all-time great fighters, the greatest showman the sport has ever seen. But his day is done at 37 years old, and Dana White and the UFC should not let him fight again. Agree? Disagree? Let me know your thoughts. Drop your comments. Thanks for stopping by here on Overtime with Matt Moscona. Do me a favor. If you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video right here on Overtime with Matt Moscona.